Billionaire CEO rescues homeless single mother from rain only to find his secret sons. The rain hammered against the pavement like bullets from the sky, and Richard Blackwell stood frozen in that downpour, his $1,000 suit soaking through to his skin, staring at the woman he had spent 7 years trying to forget. Nancy's voice cut through the thunder, sharp as a blade and twice as cold. "Yes, Richard. Daniel and Michael are your sons. Congratulations." Richard felt the world tilt beneath his feet. His lungs forgot how to draw air. His mind raced through calculations it was 6 years too late to make. "That is not possible." Richard's voice came out strangled, broken. "You would have told me. We were together for 2 years. You loved me. You would not have kept something like this from me." Nancy laughed, but there was no humor in the sound, only bitterness carved from years of struggle. "Would I not have? You were so certain you knew me, Richard, just like you were certain about everything else." The two boys huddled behind her, watching this exchange with eyes far too old for their 6 years. Eyes that Richard suddenly realized looked exactly like his own. "I do not understand. When you found out you were pregnant, why did you not tell me?" Nancy's composure cracked, and 7 years of pain flooded through. "When I found out I was pregnant, I went to your apartment to surprise you with the news. I was going to tell you in person, make it special. But you were not alone, were you, Richard?" The memory hit him like a physical blow. Rebecca, his father's business partner's daughter, the woman who had shown up uninvited while he was packing for London, the kiss he had pushed away from seconds after it happened, the moment that had apparently cost him everything. "You saw that?" The words came out as barely a whisper. "I saw enough. I saw you with her, and I watched everything I believed about us turn to dust. So I left. I wrote you a letter explaining everything, left it with your doorman, and I walked away from you forever. I never received any letter. Then your doorman was either incompetent or instructed to destroy anything from me. Either way, you made your choice, and I made mine. I decided to raise my children alone, rather than share them with a man who had betrayed me." Richard's chest constricted with a pain he had no name for. 6 years. He had missed 6 years of their lives. First steps, first words, birthday parties and sick nights and all the ordinary moments that make up a childhood. Gone. Stolen by a misunderstanding and a letter that never arrived. One of the twins, the smaller one with the watchful eyes, tugged at Nancy's soaked sleeve. "Mama, I am cold." That small voice, that simple admission of vulnerability, seemed to crack something in Nancy's armor. She pulled her children closer, but there was nowhere to go. The bodega was closed. The shelter was full. The rain showed no signs of stopping. And Richard Blackwell, who had built an empire from the ashes of his father's failure, who had conquered every challenge the business world could throw at him, stood helpless in the storm, watching the family he never knew he had shiver in the cold. "Come with me." The words left his mouth before he could think them through. "I have a hotel. I own a hotel. I will get you a suite, dry clothes, food, just for tonight. No strings, no obligations. Please." Nancy's eyes narrowed with suspicion born from years of learning that nothing came without cost. "Why? Why do you care what happens to us?" Richard looked at the two boys who watched him with expressions that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. Something about their faces, the set of their jaws, the way they stood protective of each other, sent echoes of recognition through his soul. "Because I could not live with myself if I drove away and left you here. Because whatever happened between us, you do not deserve this. No one does. But to understand how Richard Blackwell ended up standing in that storm, watching his entire world transform, we need to go back to where this night began." Earlier that same evening, Richard stood in his penthouse office on the 47th floor of Blackwell Tower, staring out at a Manhattan skyline that belonged to him in ways both literal and figurative. The city spread below like a circuit board of ambition and electricity, and somewhere in those millions of lights were people fighting, loving, living lives that mattered to someone. Richard could not remember the last time his life had mattered to anyone but his accountants and shareholders. At 38 years old, he had achieved everything society told him to want. His company, Blackwell Industries, spanned real estate, technology, and hospitality. His net worth required scientific notation to express properly. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines about vision and success and the future of American business. And he had never felt more empty. His reflection stared back at him, from the floor-to-ceiling windows, dark hair showing the first distinguished threads of silver, jaw set in the permanent tension of a man who could not afford to relax. eyes that analysts called sharp and calculating, but that Richard knew were simply tired. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his moment of melancholy. "Mr. Blackwell, your car is waiting. The foundation gala begins in 40 minutes. Richard checked his watch, a gesture born of habit rather than necessity. The Blackwell Foundation's annual charity event. 300 of Manhattan's elite gathering to congratulate themselves on their philanthropy, while servers in white gloves ensured their champagne never ran empty. He should feel excited, or at least professionally engaged. This was his foundation, his legacy project, his attempt to prove that all the wealth he had accumulated served some purpose beyond feeding his ego. Instead, he felt nothing. "Tell Gerald I will be down in 5 minutes." He gathered his things with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had performed this routine 1,000 times. Phone, wallet, the speech his assistant had written that he would pretend to deliver spontaneously, the smile he would paste on that everyone would believe was genuine, because billionaires were expected to be happy. The elevator ride down gave him 90 seconds of solitude, 90 seconds where he did not have to perform, where he could let his face settle into its natural expression of exhaustion and something that might have been loneliness if he allowed himself to name it. The doors opened to the parking garage, and Richard became himself again, or rather, became the version of himself the world expected to see. "Good evening, Mr. Blackwell." Gerald held the town car door open with practiced grace. "Shall I take the usual route?" "Whatever gets us there on time." Richard settled into the leather interior, watching the city slide past through tinted windows. Rain had begun to fall, gentle at first, dotting the glass with drops that caught the streetlights like scattered diamonds. Within minutes, gentle became aggressive. The sky opened with a violence that seemed almost personal, dumping water onto Manhattan streets with an intensity that overwhelmed storm drains and sent pedestrians scrambling for cover. This came out of nowhere. Gerald navigated carefully through the chaos. Weather service said nothing about storms tonight. Richard watched the rain with the detached interest of someone for whom weather was merely an inconvenience rather than a crisis. His buildings had roofs. His cars had windshields. His world was climate-controlled and consequence-free. But outside that controlled world, he could see people struggling. A woman with a broken umbrella. A man clutching a newspaper over his head. A family huddled in a doorway, children pressed against parents who could not protect them from the elements no matter how desperately they tried. Something about that family caught his attention. The fierce protectiveness in the mother's posture. The way the children clung to her as if she could shield them from anything. The inadequacy of their shelter against the violence of the storm. "Gerald, pull over here." "Sir, we will be late for the foundation event." Richard was already reaching for the door handle. "I said, pull over." The rain hit him like a wall of cold water the moment he stepped out. His suit, custom-tailored and worth more than some people earned in a month, immediately began absorbing moisture. His shoes, Italian leather that had never encountered a puddle, filled with water within seconds. None of that mattered. He approached the bodega awning slowly, not wanting to frighten the family huddled beneath it. Up close, he could see them more clearly. A woman, early 30s, with dark hair plastered to her face and clothes that had been cheap before they became soaked. 2 boys, identical twins, wearing jackets that were at least a size too small and had clearly been purchased from a second-hand store. They looked at him with expressions that broke his heart. Not hope exactly, but the wary consideration of people who had learned that strangers rarely brought good news. "Miss, are you all right?" The woman looked up, and Richard's world stopped. He would know those eyes anywhere. Amber flecked with gold, the color of honey held up to sunlight. He had spent 2 years falling into those eyes. He had spent 7 years trying to forget them. "Nancy?" Her name emerged from his throat like a prayer he had forgotten he knew how to speak. Recognition flickered across her face. Shock first, then something harder. Walls going up, armor assembling, the softness he remembered disappearing behind a fortress of pain. Richard, just his name. No warmth, no surprise. Just acknowledgement of a fact she would clearly prefer not to be true. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain continued its assault. The twins watched with the careful attention of children who had learned to read situations for danger. And Richard stood frozen, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the woman who had vanished from his life 7 years ago, without explanation. "What are you doing out here?" His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Too emotional, too raw. The carefully constructed billionaire persona crumbling in the face of this ghost from his past. Nancy's laugh held no humor. What does it look like I am doing? I am trying to keep my children dry. Not that it is any of your business. Your children? Richard's eyes moved to the twins automatically. Now that he was closer, now that he was really looking, he could see things that made his chest tight with something he could not name. The shape of their faces, the set of their eyebrows, the stubborn tilt of their chins that seemed impossibly familiar. Yes, my children. And we are fine, so you can go back to whatever important event you are clearly dressed for and forget you ever saw us. She was lying. They were not fine. That much was obvious from the way she shivered, from the blue tinge creeping into the boy's lips, from the desperation hiding behind her defensive anger. Nancy, the rain is getting worse. Let me help. We do not need your help. We do not need anything from you. One of the twins, the one with the longer hair and the more open expression, looked up at his mother with concern. Mama, where are we going to sleep tonight? The question hit Richard like a punch to the stomach. What do you mean, where are you going to sleep? The words came out sharper than he intended. Nancy's expression flickered. Shame mixed with defiance, mixed with the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting for survival so long she had forgotten what peace felt like. The shelter is full tonight. Usually we get a spot, but there was a problem and now there is nothing available until tomorrow. We were going to wait out the storm and then figure something out. Shelter. Full. Tomorrow. Each word landed with the weight of revelation. Nancy, who had been studying to become a doctor when he knew her. Nancy, who had dreams and ambitions and a future that sparkled with possibility. Nancy was living in shelters and sleeping on the street when beds were not available. While Richard had been accumulating wealth, he could not spend in 10 lifetimes. Come with me, he heard himself say it again, more certain this time. Please, Nancy, whatever happened between us, whatever you think of me, do not let the boys suffer because of it. Let me get you somewhere warm and dry for tonight. You can go back to hating me tomorrow. The twins looked up at their mother with identical expressions of hope. They did not know who Richard was or why their mother seemed to hate him. They only knew they were cold and wet and scared, and the stranger was offering warmth. Nancy stared at Richard for a long moment. He watched her weighing options, calculating risks, measuring the cost of accepting help from someone she clearly wished had never found her. Finally, she nodded, a small, tight movement that granted permission without approval. One night. That is all. And this changes nothing between us. Of course. Richard stripped off his overcoat and wrapped it around the twins before Nancy could protest. The boys looked up at him with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. Come on. The car is just there. Gerald will have the heat on. He led them through the rain to the town car, where Gerald stood waiting with an umbrella that was woefully inadequate against the storm, but still better than nothing. Mr. Blackwell, should I still head to the Foundation Gala? No. Take us to the Grand Hotel instead, and call ahead to have the penthouse suite prepared. Gerald's eyebrows rose slightly, but years of professional discretion kept him from commenting. He simply nodded and held the door as the bedraggled group climbed inside. The interior of the car was warm and dry, a different universe from the chaos outside. The twins pressed against the windows, watching the rain-blurred city slide past with expressions of wonder that suggested they had not seen many luxury vehicles in their short lives. Richard could not stop looking at them, at the shapes of their faces, at the way they moved, at 1,000 small details that sent echoes of recognition through his mind without quite resolving into understanding. How old are they? The question came out before he could stop it. Nancy's jaw tightened. Why do you care? I am making conversation. They are 6 years and 4 months. Their birthday is March 16th. Richard did the math automatically. Count back 9 months from March. June, which meant they would have been conceived in late June. 7 years ago, in late June, Richard and Nancy had been inseparable. He had been preparing for a 6-month assignment in London. She had been finishing her pre-med requirements and applying to medical schools. They had been young and in love, and absolutely certain they would find a way to make it work. 6 years and 4 months old, conceived when he and Nancy were still together. Richard's mind raced through implications he was not ready to face. The familiar set of their features, the way they carried themselves, the something that had been nagging at him since he first saw them under that inadequate awning. His heart began to pound so hard he was certain Nancy could hear it. Nancy. Her name came out strangled. Do not. Those boys. I said do not. Are they mine? The silence that followed was louder than the thunder outside. The twins looked between the adults with confusion. Gerald kept his eyes firmly on the road, professional discretion stretched to its absolute limit. Nancy's face went through a series of transformations. Anger, fear, resignation, and finally, a kind of exhausted acceptance. Yes, Richard, Daniel and Michael are your sons. Congratulations. And there it was, the truth that had been hiding in plain sight, the secret that had shaped 7 years of separate lives, the revelation that changed everything and nothing all at once. Richard felt the world tilt beneath him. Those 2 shivering boys in his ruined overcoat, with their familiar faces and their watchful eyes, were his children. His sons, his blood and bone and legacy, living in shelters and wearing second-hand clothes while he accumulated wealth that could have given them everything. Why did you not tell me? The question came out raw, scraped from somewhere deep in his chest. I told you. I left a letter with your doorman explaining everything. It had all the details, the pregnancy, what I saw at your apartment, why I was leaving, everything. I never received any letter. Then I do not know what to tell you. I left it. What happened after that is not my responsibility. Nancy, I swear to you, I never got that letter. If I had known you were pregnant, if I had known about the boys, I would have been there. I would have found you. I would have done everything differently. Pretty words. Nancy's voice was ice. But I have heard your pretty words before. They did not mean much when you were kissing another woman 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave for medical school. The car pulled up to the Blackwell Grand Hotel, its facade gleaming through the rain. Doormen stood ready, despite the weather, umbrellas at attention. Richard wanted to continue the conversation, wanted to defend himself, wanted to make her understand that the kiss she saw had been unwanted and immediately rejected. But the twins were watching with wide, confused eyes, absorbing every word of a conflict they did not understand. We are here. Richard forced calm into his voice. Let us get inside and warm. We can continue this conversation after the boys are comfortable. The transition from rain-soaked street to the opulent lobby of the Grand Hotel was jarring. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across marble floors. Massive floral arrangements perfumed the air with scents that probably cost more per month than Nancy had seen in a year. The twins stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed. Their wet shoes left marks on the pristine floor. Their second-hand jackets dripped water onto surfaces maintained by an army of cleaning staff. They looked like they had stumbled into a fairy tale and were waiting to be told it was a mistake. Mr. Blackwell. The concierge appeared immediately, professional smile perfectly calibrated. We have prepared the penthouse as requested. Shall I have fresh clothing sent up for your guests? Yes. Full wardrobe selection for a woman and 2 boys approximately 6 years old. Something comfortable. And send up room service, whatever comfort food you have available. Hot chocolate for the children. And cancel my appearance at the Foundation Gala. Tell them I had an emergency. Right away, sir. The concierge disappeared to execute orders while Richard guided his unexpected family toward the private elevator. Nancy walked stiffly beside him, pride and discomfort warring for dominance in her expression. The twins held hands and tried not to touch anything, as if afraid they might break something. You can relax. Richard spoke quietly, mostly to the boys. Nothing in this hotel can be damaged by wet clothes or curious children. And if it can, I promise I can replace it. The elevator ride was silent except to the soft hum of machinery and the dripping of water from their clothes. When the doors opened to the penthouse level, Richard saw Nancy's eyes widen, despite her determination to remain unimpressed. The penthouse suite occupied the entire top floor of the hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan spread out below, lights glittering through the rain like fallen stars. The living room alone was larger than most apartments, furnished with pieces that cost more than most people earned in years. This is your hotel. Nancy said it like an accusation. I own several hotels. This is just the one in New York. Before she could respond, the twins broke away from her, drawn by the impossible view. Mama, look. Daniel, the more outgoing of the 2, pressed his face against the window. We can see forever. It is like we are in the clouds. Michael, quieter and more cautious, stood beside his brother but did not touch the glass. He looked back at his mother with an expression that asked permission to be amazed. It is okay. Nancy's voice softened when she spoke to her children. You can look. Just be careful. The suite will have 3 bedrooms. Richard spoke carefully, aware of boundaries that needed to be established. You and the boys can take whichever ones you prefer. There should be robes in the bathrooms you can use until dry clothes arrive. And please, order whatever you want from room service. Everything is taken care of." Nancy turned to face him, and for a moment, the hard shell she had constructed cracked slightly. "Why are you doing this?" "I told you why." "No. You told me a reason that sounds nice. I want to know the real reason. Is it guilt? Some kind of billionaire savior complex? Are you trying to buy forgiveness?" Richard considered the question seriously. It deserved a serious answer. "I am doing this because 20 minutes ago I discovered I have 2 sons I never knew existed. Sons who have been living in shelters while I accumulated more wealth than I could ever spend. I cannot undo the past 6 years. I cannot go back and be there for their first steps or their first words or any of the moments I missed. But I can make sure they are warm and safe and fed tonight. And maybe, if you will let me, I can start being there for the moments that have not happened yet." Nancy stared at him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face seemed to satisfy something, because some of the tension left her shoulders. "We will stay tonight, but this does not change anything between us. In the morning, we will leave, and you can go back to your life. My life is never going back to what it was." Richard said it quietly, but with absolute certainty. "I have sons. That changes everything. But we do not need to figure it all out tonight. Get the boys settled. Warm up. Eat something. We can talk more when everyone is not exhausted and soaked." Nancy nodded once, then turned to collect the twins from the window. Richard watched her go, watched the way Daniel took her hand trustingly, and Michael fell into step on her other side, protecting her flank even at 6 years old. His sons. Those remarkable, resilient, clearly loved children were his sons. And he had missed every single day of their lives. Before we continue with this pivotal story that is about to reshape 3 lives forever, I need to pause and speak directly to you. When I created Mr. Dalton's Story House, I wanted to build a space where we could explore the messy, complicated reality of love, forgiveness, and second chances. Not fairy tales where everything works out easily, but real stories about real people navigating impossible situations. If you are watching this right now, if something about Richard and Nancy's story is resonating with you, then you are exactly who I make these stories for. Maybe you have been betrayed. Maybe you have been the one who made the mistake. Maybe you are just trying to figure out if broken things can ever truly be fixed. Here is what I need from you. If this story is speaking to you, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this story reach others who need to hear it. Share this with someone who needs to believe that survival is possible, that strength can come from devastation, that our worst moments do not have to define our entire story. Subscribe if you have not already, because this is just the beginning. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Now, back to this penthouse suite in New York, where 2 people who once loved each other are trying to figure out how to be parents together while barely being able to stand in the same room. Room service arrived with military precision. Trays of comfort food appeared as if by magic. Hot chocolate with real whipped cream for the twins. Coffee for the adults. Sandwiches and soup and pasta, and enough food to feed a small army. The twins fell on the meal with an intensity that made Richard's heart ache. They ate like children, who were never quite certain when the next meal would come. Carefully at first, then with increasing confidence as they realized there was more than enough. Daniel talked with his mouth full, asking questions about everything. Did Richard really own this hotel? The whole building? Were there secret rooms? Could they explore tomorrow? His enthusiasm was exhausting and wonderful. Michael ate more slowly, watching Richard with the same analytical attention Richard saw in his own mirror every morning. Evaluating, assessing, deciding whether this stranger could be trusted. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Richard asked, trying to make conversation that did not touch on the minefield of the past. Daniel answered immediately. "A paleontologist. I want to dig up dinosaurs. Did you know there is a dinosaur called Therizinosaurus that had claws 3 feet long? Most people only know about T-Rex, but there are way better dinosaurs." "I did not know that." Richard found himself genuinely interested. "Tell me more." Daniel launched into an extended lecture about obscure dinosaurs, while Michael watched his brother with a mixture of affection and exasperation. Nancy sat slightly apart, drinking coffee and saying nothing. But Richard noticed she was watching the interaction carefully. "What about you, Michael?" Richard asked when Daniel paused for breath. "What do you want to be?" Michael considered the question seriously. "I like building things. Rockets and buildings and machines. I want to make things that work. An engineer then." Or maybe an architect. Maybe. Michael's tone suggested he was reserving judgment on whether this conversation would continue long enough to matter. The evening continued in that strange, awkward way. The twins eventually explored the penthouse with permission, discovering bathrooms with tubs like swimming pools and beds big enough for entire families. Richard showed them how to work the television and found cartoons to occupy them while the adults talked. Or tried to talk. Nancy remained on the opposite side of the room, arms crossed, posture defensive. "We need to discuss arrangements," Richard finally said. "For the boys. For what happens next. There is nothing to discuss. In the morning, we leave. You return to your life. Nothing changes. Everything has already changed. I know about them now. You cannot expect me to pretend I do not have sons. I expect you to respect that I have been raising them alone for 6 years and I do not need or want your interference. It is not interference. It is fatherhood." Nancy laughed bitterly. "Fatherhood? You have known about them for 2 hours. You have been their father for 2 hours. I have been their mother through ear infections and nightmares and a heart surgery that almost destroyed me financially. I have been their mother through every single day of their lives while you were attending galas and accumulating billions. Do not talk to me about fatherhood." "Heart surgery?" The question came out sharp, alarmed. Nancy's expression flickered. "Michael had a small heart defect. It was repaired when he was 3. He is fine now. You are telling me my son needed heart surgery and I did not know about it. I am telling you that my son needed heart surgery and his mother handled it. Like she has handled everything else, alone." Richard felt the words like physical blows. His son, his child, had been sick enough to require surgery, had been cut open and repaired by strangers, while Richard was probably in some boardroom debating quarterly projections. "That is why you lost everything." He was putting pieces together. "The medical bills. Medical debt is efficient at destroying lives." Nancy's voice was flat. "Insurance covered some of it. Not enough. I worked 3 jobs trying to pay off the rest while keeping us housed and fed. Eventually, something had to give. 6 months ago, it was the apartment. 6 months. You have been homeless for 6 months? Homeless is such an absolute word. We have had shelter beds when they were available, motel rooms when I could afford them, the car for a few weeks before it was repossessed. It is not like we were sleeping under bridges." But she was defensive, and Richard recognized the pride that was keeping her from admitting how bad things had been. "Let me help. Please. I have more money than I could ever spend. Let me at least provide stability for the boys. We do not need your money. This is not about what you need. This is about what they deserve. They deserve a home, Nancy. A real home with their own rooms and a neighborhood with good schools. They deserve to not worry about where they will sleep tomorrow. And what do you get out of it?" The question hung in the air. Richard understood what she was really asking. What was the price of his help? What strings were attached? "I get to know them." He said it simply. "I get to be part of their lives in whatever way you will allow. I am not trying to take them from you or replace you or undo the past 6 years. I just want the chance to be their father going forward." Nancy was quiet for a long moment. In the other room, they could hear the twins laughing at something on the television. Normal childhood sounds in a completely abnormal situation. "I need to think about it," she finally said. "This is too much to process in one night. I need time. Take whatever time you need. But in the meantime, stay here. There is no reason to go back to shelters when I have empty rooms and the ability to help. That feels too much like accepting charity. Then do not think of it as charity. Think of it as making up for 6 years of child support I should have been paying." The logic was flawed, and they both knew it, but it gave Nancy a framework that allowed her pride to remain intact. She nodded slowly. "We will stay tonight. Maybe a few days while I figure out next steps, but this is not permanent. Whatever you are comfortable with." The twins were fading by the time Nancy gathered them for bed. Hot food and warm surroundings had drained the nervous energy that had been keeping them alert. They moved sluggishly through their nighttime routines, changed into the hotel robes that hung like dresses on their small frames. Richard lingered in the living room, giving them privacy while desperately wanting to be part of the ritual. He could hear Nancy's voice, soft and loving, so different from the ice she directed at him. He heard the twins asking questions and her patient answers. Then footsteps, and Michael appeared in the doorway. He studied Richard with that assessing gaze. "Mama says you knew her before we were born." "I did. A long time ago. Were you friends? Richard considered how to answer. More than friends. We cared about each other very much. Then why did you leave? The question cut deep. I did not leave, Richard said carefully. There was a misunderstanding. A really big one. And by the time I realized what had happened, your mother was already gone. I looked for her, but I could not find her. Michael processed this information with visible skepticism. Mama says you have to say sorry when you make mistakes. She is right, and I have a lot of sorry to say. More than you can probably understand right now. Are you going to say sorry to her? I am going to try. But some sorries take a long time to be heard. Sometimes you have to prove you are sorry through actions, not just words. Michael nodded slowly, apparently finding this answer acceptable. I do not know if I like you yet, he announced. But Daniel thinks you are okay because you listened to him talk about dinosaurs for a really long time, without interrupting. Most adults do not do that. I found it genuinely interesting. He talks about dinosaurs a lot. Like, a lot. I will keep that in mind. Michael almost smiled. Then he turned and walked back toward the bedrooms, pausing at the doorway. Good night, Mr. Richard. Good night, Michael. The boy disappeared, and Richard was left alone in the penthouse living room with a view of Manhattan and a heart full of emotions he had no name for. He had sons, two remarkable, resilient, clearly loved boys who had survived 6 years of struggle and still maintained the capacity for wonder and skepticism in equal measure. They were his blood, his legacy, the children he had never allowed himself to imagine having, because imagining them meant imagining them with Nancy, and that wound had never healed. Now she was here, in his penthouse, sleeping in his guest room with their children between them like a wall. And somehow, impossibly, he had a second chance, not to fix the past, because the past was irretrievably broken, but to build something new, to become the father he should have been all along, to prove to Nancy that the man she thought she knew, the man who had apparently betrayed her, had never actually existed. The kiss she saw had lasted perhaps 3 seconds before Richard pushed Rebecca away. 3 seconds that had cost him 7 years. 3 seconds that had left his sons growing up without him. He would find out what happened to that letter. He would prove to Nancy that he had never received it. He would make her understand that he had been betrayed too, manipulated by someone with an agenda he was only beginning to perceive. But all of that could wait until morning. Tonight, he was just going to sit here in the darkness and let himself feel the weight of fatherhood settling onto his shoulders. The fear, the joy, the overwhelming responsibility of having 2 small humans who shared his DNA and deserved his protection. Tonight, for the first time in 7 years, Richard Blackwell felt something other than emptiness. He felt hope. The next morning brought watery sunshine through the penthouse windows, the storm having exhausted itself during the night. Richard woke from a few hours of restless sleep on the couch, having given all 3 bedrooms to his unexpected guests. He could hear movement in the kitchen, small voices and the sound of cabinets opening and closing. When he appeared in the doorway, he found Daniel standing on a chair, reaching for something on a high shelf, while Michael supervised with obvious disapproval. You are going to fall and hurt yourself. I am not going to fall. I am being careful. You said that last time, and you fell and hurt yourself. Richard cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle them. Good morning. Can I help you find something? Daniel looked down without a hint of embarrassment about being caught in a precarious position. We were looking for cereal. Mama's still sleeping and we got hungry. There should be some in the pantry. Richard crossed the kitchen and found a selection of breakfast options that the hotel kept stocked for guests. He poured 2 bowls of cereal, added milk, and set them on the breakfast bar. Thank you, Mr. Richard. Daniel said it with the automatic politeness of a well-raised child. You can call me Richard, or whatever you are comfortable with. The twins exchanged a look that communicated something only they understood. Mama calls you Richard when she sounds angry, Michael observed. She calls you other things when she does not know we are listening. Richard winced internally, but kept his expression neutral. I probably deserve whatever she calls me, but I hope we can get to a place where she does not feel the need to call me those things anymore. They ate their cereal in silence for a few minutes. Richard made coffee and tried not to stare at his sons like a man seeing water after wandering in a desert. Daniel finished first and immediately launched into conversation. What do you do? Like for a job? I run a company. Several companies, actually. What kind of companies? Buildings, mostly. Hotels like this one. Technology projects. It is complicated. Mama says complicated is what adults say when they do not want to explain things properly. Richard laughed, despite himself. Your mother is very perceptive. Okay, here is the simple version. I help people build things. Buildings, businesses, ideas. People come to me with plans and I help make those plans real. Like magic? More like math. And a lot of meetings. Michael looked up from his cereal. I like building things too. But with Legos, not real buildings. Legos are how it starts. Richard found himself on familiar ground. All the great architects and engineers started by building small things before they built big things. Do you want to show me what you are working on? Michael's expression shifted from suspicious to interested. I do not have my Legos here. They are in storage. The word storage landed heavily. Their belongings, whatever they had, were somewhere in a storage unit. Probably the kind that charged by the month and eventually auctioned off contents when payment stopped. We could get new Legos. Richard offered carefully. If your mother approves, she will say no. Daniel said it with certainty. She does not like when people buy us things. She says we have to earn what we get. She is teaching you good values. Richard respected that, even as it complicated his desire to give them everything immediately. But sometimes it is okay to accept gifts, especially when the person giving them wants to make up for missing a lot of birthdays. The twins processed this information. How many birthdays did you miss? Michael asked. 6. That is a lot of birthdays. Yes. Yes, it is. Nancy appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking tired and rumpled, and somehow still managing to project dignity despite wearing a hotel robe and having clearly just woken up. Boys, you know better than to bother people before breakfast. They were not bothering me. Richard stood, suddenly awkward. I was just helping them find cereal. There is coffee if you want some. Nancy's eyes went to the twins, assessing that they were safe and fed before returning to Richard. Thank you. For the coffee and for the help. It was nothing. The 3 words hung between them, meaning far more than their literal definition. It was nothing compared to what he wanted to offer. It was nothing compared to what he owed them. Nancy poured herself coffee and sat at the breakfast bar with the twins, creating a unit that Richard was clearly outside of. He understood. He had not earned a place inside that circle yet. I have to go into the office for a few hours, he said carefully. But the suite is yours for as long as you need it. Order anything you want from room service. The hotel staff will get you anything you need. Richard. Nancy's voice stopped him at the door. We should talk about arrangements, about what happens next. Whenever you are ready. I will be back this afternoon. We can discuss it then. She nodded, and he left them there in his penthouse, eating cereal and drinking coffee like a normal family having a normal morning. Except nothing about this was normal. His office felt different when he arrived. The familiar surroundings of Blackwell Tower, the space he had built and controlled and dominated, suddenly seemed less important. The numbers on his computer screen, the reports waiting for his attention, the meetings scheduled for the day. All of it felt like someone else's life. Victoria Ashford was waiting in his office when he arrived. His VP of development, brilliant and ambitious, and always precisely where she needed to be. You missed the gala last night. Her tone walked the line between concern and accusation. The board was asking questions. I had a family emergency. I was not aware you had family. Neither was I. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. She had not gotten where she was by missing subtext. Is there anything I should know? Not yet. I am still figuring things out. But there may be some changes coming. Changes to your schedule? Changes to everything. He said it without explanation, leaving her to draw her own conclusions. Whatever those conclusions were, Richard knew he would need to deal with Victoria eventually. She was too perceptive to miss the shift in his priorities, and too ambitious to let it affect her own trajectory without response. But that was a problem for another day. The morning passed in a blur of delegated responsibilities and postponed meetings. Richard found himself staring at photos on his phone, pictures he had taken surreptitiously last night. The twins watching television, Nancy drinking coffee by the window, small moments that documented the beginning of whatever came next. He hired a private investigator before lunch. Background check on the doorman who had worked his building 7 years ago. Investigation into what had happened to the letter Nancy claimed to have left. If there was evidence that he had been manipulated, that someone had deliberately kept Nancy's letter from reaching him, he would find it. The afternoon brought him back to the penthouse, where he found a scene of domestic chaos. The twins had discovered the hotel's complimentary toy service, and the living room was now covered in Lego pieces. They were building something elaborate and incomprehensible, arguing good-naturedly about structural integrity. Nancy sat on the couch, watching them with an expression that mixed exhaustion with love. When she saw Richard, some of the softness faded. But not all of it. "They have been at this for hours," she said by way of greeting. "I tried to get them to stop for lunch, but apparently the project is too important." "What are they building?" Michael looked up briefly. "A rocket base for launching dinosaur explorers into space." "Of course." Richard sat down across from Nancy, maintaining careful distance. "That makes perfect sense." They worked in silence for a few minutes, the twins absorbed in their construction while the adults navigated the awkwardness of proximity without resolution. "I have been thinking," Nancy finally said, "about what you said last night, about wanting to be part of their lives. I am not ready to make any permanent decisions, but I am willing to consider supervised visits while we figure out longer-term arrangements." Richard's heart jumped despite his determination to remain calm. "What would supervised visits look like?" "You can see them with me present. No unsupervised time until I am confident you are committed and reliable. If you prove yourself over the next few months, we can discuss expanding the arrangement." "That seems reasonable." "It is not just reasonable. It is the only option. These are my children, Richard. I have been everything to them for 6 years. I will not hand them over to someone who might decide fatherhood is inconvenient when the novelty wears off." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because I have seen your life. The magazines, the headlines. Richard Blackwell, eligible bachelor. Richard Blackwell spotted with another model. You have not exactly demonstrated commitment to anything that was not your company." Richard absorbed the criticism without defending himself. She was right, from her perspective. The public version of his life looked exactly like she described. "I have not had anything worth committing to," he said quietly. "Not since you left. Do not do that." "Do what?" "Make this romantic. I am not the woman you lost. I am the mother of 2 children who need stability more than they need a dramatic reunion with an absent father." "I know. I am just telling you the truth. Since you left, I have filled my life with work and achievements because they were the only things I could control. But none of it made me happy. None of it felt like it mattered. And then last night I found out I have sons, and for the first time in 7 years, something matters." Nancy was quiet for a long moment, watching the twins argue about where to put a specific Lego piece. "I need you to understand something," she finally said. "Those boys are my entire world. Everything I have done for 6 years, every sacrifice, every struggle, every moment of desperation was for them. If you come into their lives and then disappear when things get difficult, it will not just hurt them. It will destroy them, and I will not let that happen. I am not going to disappear. I have heard promises before. I know. And I know I have to prove it through actions, not words. So let me start proving it. Tell me what you need. An apartment, a house, whatever will give you stability. Let me provide that while we figure out the rest. That feels like charity. It is child support. 6 years of back payment. Consider it that if it makes it easier to accept." Nancy's jaw tightened, but Richard could see her calculating. She was practical above all else. If accepting his help meant security for her children, she would find a way to swallow her pride. "Fine." She said it like she was agreeing to a business arrangement. "We will need an apartment, something in a decent neighborhood, with good schools. I will pay you back eventually. You will not pay me back, and we both know it. But if saying that makes you feel better, then yes, you will pay me back eventually." Something almost like a smile flickered across her face before she suppressed it. "You are still infuriating. I prefer to think of it as persistent." They worked out preliminary details over the next hour, while the twins continued their construction project and occasionally demanded parental attention. Richard would find them an apartment, cover the costs, set up trust funds for the boys' education and medical needs. In exchange, he would have visitation rights, building gradually from supervised visits to potentially unsupervised time if he proved himself reliable. It was not the immediate reconciliation Richard might have fantasized about, but it was a foundation, something to build on. "I have investigators looking into what happened to your letter," he told her as she was preparing to get the twins ready for bed. "If someone deliberately kept it from me, I want to know who." Nancy's expression hardened. "It does not matter anymore. Whether someone destroyed it or you threw it away yourself, the result was the same. I raised our sons alone. It matters to me. Because if I was manipulated, I want to know by whom and why. And because I want you to believe me when I say I never knew about them. The truth matters, Nancy. Even 7 years later, she did not respond. But something in her expression suggested she was at least willing to consider the possibility. The evening routine that followed was both heartbreaking and wonderful. Richard watched Nancy put the twins to bed, watched the rituals they had developed without him, the inside jokes and bedtime stories and goodnight kisses that were part of a world he had never known existed. Michael demanded a story about rockets. Daniel wanted one about dinosaurs. Nancy compromised by telling a story about dinosaurs who built rockets and explored space together. It was ridiculous and delightful, and Richard felt tears threatening at the simple evidence of a family functioning without him. "Good night, Mr. Richard," Michael said from his pillow. When Richard appeared in the doorway, "Good night, Michael. Are you going to be here tomorrow?" "If your mother says it is okay, yes." Michael considered this. "Okay. She usually says yes when it is something good." The implicit approval, tentative and conditional, felt like a gift Richard had not earned, but desperately wanted to deserve. Later, after the twins were asleep, he and Nancy sat in the living room with drinks neither of them really wanted. "They are remarkable," Richard said softly. "You have done an amazing job with them." Nancy's defenses flickered. "They are the best thing I have ever done. The only thing I have ever done that really mattered. What happened to medical school? You were so passionate about it. Life happened. Pregnancy. Single motherhood. Survival. Medical school requires time and money and stability. I had none of those things. You could still do it. The boys are in school full-time now. If you had support, childcare, financial security, are you offering to buy me a medical degree? I am offering to remove the obstacles that have kept you from pursuing your dream, the dream that was stolen when you had to choose between school and our children." Nancy was quiet for a long moment. "I am not who I was 7 years ago," she finally said. "I am harder now, more realistic. Dreams are luxuries I learned to live without. Dreams are not luxuries. They are necessities that people like us have the privilege of pursuing. You should not have had to give up yours. People like us, people with resources, people with options. You should have always had those options, Nancy. If I had known about the boys, if I had been there, you would have. If is a big word, carrying a lot of weight. I know, and I know I cannot change the past, but I can affect the future. Let me help you get back what was taken from you." Nancy looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why does this matter to you so much? The medical school thing. It is my dream, not yours, because I saw who you were when you had that dream. The passion in your eyes when you talked about becoming a doctor. The fire. You were going to change the world, Nancy. And watching you struggle, watching that fire diminish, it hurts me. Even after everything, it hurts me." The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than either had intended. "I should go to bed." Nancy stood abruptly, breaking the moment. "We have apartment hunting to do tomorrow. Apparently. Good night, Richard." "Good night, Nancy." She walked away toward the bedrooms, and Richard watched her go, filled with emotions he had no right to feel. Hope, longing, the beginning of something that might become love again, if they both allowed it. But that was a long way off. For now there were apartments to find and children to know and trust to rebuild, brick by painful brick. Tomorrow would be another day of proving himself, and every day after that, for as long as it took. Richard settled onto the couch that had become his bed and stared at the Manhattan skyline through the window. Somewhere out there, Rebecca Ashford had probably moved on with her life, never knowing or caring about the destruction her casual cruelty had caused. But Richard would find out the truth. He would prove to Nancy that he had been manipulated too. And together, somehow, they would build something new from the wreckage of what had been stolen from them. The twins deserved nothing less. And maybe, just maybe, so did they. This concludes part 1 of the script. Part 2 will continue from this point, covering Richard's ongoing efforts to prove himself, the developing relationships with the twins, the discovery of the full truth about the past, Victoria's scheming, the crisis and confrontation, and finally the resolution and establishment of their new family. The apartment hunt began the next morning with the kind of tension that comes from two people with very different ideas of what constitutes acceptable. Richard had arranged for a real estate agent to show them properties in Manhattan's best neighborhoods, doorman buildings with marble lobbies, penthouses with private terraces, the kind of places where children of billionaires were expected to live. Nancy rejected every single one. "This is ridiculous," she said after viewing the fifth apartment, a 4-bedroom palace overlooking Central Park. "The boys do not need a home theater. They need a neighborhood with other children. These buildings have children." Richard gestured vaguely at the amenities list. "There is a playroom on the 3rd floor, a supervised playroom where residents book time slots. That is not the same as kids playing in the street. Kids do not play in the street anymore. It is not the 1950s. You know what I mean." Nancy's frustration was mounting. "I want them to have a normal childhood, not a gilded cage where they learn that money solves everything." Richard bit back several responses that would not have helped. "What would you consider acceptable? A house with a yard, in a neighborhood where people actually know each other's names, somewhere outside the city if necessary." The request surprised him. Nancy had always loved Manhattan when they were together. The energy, the possibilities, the sense that anything could happen. "You want to leave the city? I want my children to grow up somewhere real, not somewhere where their father's money makes them different from everyone else. Our children." The correction was gentle but firm. Nancy paused, acknowledging the point with a small nod. "Our children. Fine. I want our children to grow up grounded. Is that possible, or does everything have to be a display of wealth?" "It does not have to be anything," Richard said carefully. "We can look outside the city, New Jersey, Connecticut, wherever you want. I just want you to be comfortable." They spent the rest of the day exploring suburban options, small towns with good schools and tree-lined streets, the kind of places Richard had never considered living but that Nancy examined with genuine interest. The twins, who had been dragged along on this expedition, were more interested in the yards than the houses themselves. "Look at this one," Daniel shouted from a backyard in a New Jersey suburb. "There is enough room for a whole dinosaur dig site." Michael was more practical. The garage could be a workshop for building things. Nancy watched them explore with an expression that mixed hope and fear. Hope that this could be their future. Fear that it might not work out. "What do you think?" Richard asked quietly. "I think it is too much. This house probably costs more than I will earn in my lifetime." "That is not what I asked. I asked what you think of it. For the boys. For you. If money were not an issue." Nancy was quiet for a long moment. "I think it could be a home. A real home. The kind I always wanted to give them. Then we will make it happen." Richard called the real estate agent that afternoon and made an offer over asking price. The house was theirs within a week. Moving in was chaos. The twins had very few possessions to bring, but what they had was precious. Worn books about dinosaurs, a collection of Legos that Michael had accumulated from various sources over the years, artwork Daniel had created and Nancy had somehow preserved through every move. Richard hired movers and decorators and anyone else who might ease the transition, but Nancy insisted on doing most of it herself. "They need to see that we built this," she explained while hanging curtains in the twins' shared bedroom. "Not that someone built it for us." Richard helped where he was allowed, learning the rhythm of domestic tasks he had never performed. Assembling furniture from confusing instructions, hanging pictures at heights that required consultation with everyone involved, making decisions about where things should go, and then remaking those decisions when the first choice proved wrong. The twins supervised everything with opinions about every detail. "My bed should face the window," Daniel announced, "so I can see the stars when I fall asleep." "The window faces east," Michael pointed out. "You will see the sunrise, not stars." "Then I will see the sunrise." "That is also good." Their adaptability amazed Richard. After years of instability, of shelters and motels and uncertain futures, they approached this new home with cautious optimism rather than trauma. Nancy had done something remarkable with them. She had raised children who could handle change without breaking, who maintained hope despite having every reason to abandon it. Richard wondered if he could ever do something that impressive. The first weeks in the new house established rhythms that felt almost normal. Nancy enrolled the twins in a local school where they made friends with surprising speed. Daniel found fellow dinosaur enthusiasts. Michael discovered a robotics club that captured his imagination. Richard visited twice a week as agreed, Tuesday evenings and Saturday afternoons. He showed up early, stayed late, and tried to make every moment count. Tuesday dinners became a ritual. Richard would arrive with groceries and attempt to cook something edible while the twins did homework, and Nancy supervised both activities with thinly veiled amusement. "You are burning the onions again," She called from the kitchen table where she was helping Daniel with spelling words. I am caramelizing them. That is not what caramelizing looks like. Richard looked at the pan, where the onions had progressed well past golden brown into definitely charred. Fine. I am burning them. But in my defense, no one told me cooking was this complicated. Mama makes it look easy. Michael observed from his homework. Your mother makes everything look easy. She is annoyingly competent. Nancy's lips twitched toward a smile before she suppressed it. Flattery will not save those onions. Dinner ended up being pizza delivery, but the twins did not seem to mind. They ate at the kitchen table that was slowly accumulating the scars and stains of family life, talking about school and friends and the elaborate fantasy worlds they were constructing together. Richard listened more than he spoke, learning the language of their lives. The names of classmates and teachers, the dynamics of elementary school politics, the ongoing saga of whether dragons or dinosaurs would win in a fight, a debate that apparently never reached resolution. Dragons, Daniel insisted, because they breathe fire. But dinosaurs are real, Michael countered. Or they were real. Dragons are just pretend. Pretend things can still win. In pretend, anything is possible. That is circular logic. Your face is circular logic. The conversation devolved from there, but Richard found himself smiling at the familiar rhythm of sibling bickering. They reminded him of himself at that age, before life had taught him to guard every word and calculate every interaction. What were you like as a kid? Daniel asked suddenly, apparently noticing Richard's expression. Probably a lot like you two. I argued with my sister about everything. I built elaborate things out of whatever materials I could find. I had strong opinions about dinosaurs, though I do not remember which ones were my favorites. You have a sister? I did. She passed away when I was in college. Car accident. The words came out more easily than Richard expected. Grief that had once been sharp had worn smooth over the years. I am sorry, Michael said with genuine sympathy. That is really sad. It was, but she would have loved you too. She wanted to be a teacher. She would have asked you about your dinosaur dig site and your robotics projects, and she would have remembered every detail. Nancy was watching this exchange, with an expression Richard could not quite read. You never told me about your sister, she said quietly. I do not talk about her often. It still hurts, even after all these years. But being here with them, it makes me want to share the good memories, the things that should be passed on. The evening continued with stories about Richard's childhood that he had not thought about in years. His sister teaching him to ride a bike, building a tree house that collapsed spectacularly on its first day, the family vacations that had seemed boring at the time but now glowed with nostalgic warmth. By bedtime, the twins had acquired a grandfather they had never met, an aunt who had died before they were born, and a sense of history that connected them to something larger than themselves. Good night, Dad. Daniel said it casually, like he had been saying it his whole life. Richard froze. The word landed like a physical impact, stealing his breath and threatening tears he was not prepared to shed. Good night, Daniel. Michael was more cautious, watching his brother's casual familiarity with apparent evaluation. Good night, Richard, he said, maintaining the formal distance he was not ready to abandon. Good night, Michael. Take your time. Michael nodded, acknowledging the permission to proceed at his own pace, and disappeared into the bedroom. Nancy was waiting in the hallway, having witnessed the exchange. Daniel has always been quicker to trust, she said softly. Michael takes longer, but when he commits, it is permanent. I can wait, however long it takes. They walked downstairs together, the house settling into nighttime quiet around them. Thank you, Nancy said at the door, for showing up, for being patient, for not pushing them faster than they are ready to go. I am learning that fatherhood is mostly about showing up. Everything else comes from that. Most people do not learn that. Most people think it is about providing things, money, toys, opportunities. They miss the part where presence matters more than presence. You taught me that, Richard admitted, watching you with them, seeing how you built a family out of nothing. I am just trying to follow your example. Nancy's expression softened for a moment before her walls reassembled. I should let you go. It is late. Same time Saturday. Same time Saturday. She closed the door gently, and Richard walked to his car with a heart fuller than it had been in 7 years. Saturdays became their adventure days. Richard would arrive in the morning and they would explore together, all 4 of them, the parameters of supervised visitation gradually feeling less like restriction and more like routine. They went to museums where Daniel could lecture anyone who would listen about prehistoric creatures. They visited science centers where Michael could interact with engineering exhibits for hours. They found parks and playgrounds and all the simple pleasures that children require and adults forget to pursue. Richard learned things he had never known he needed to learn. How to pack snacks for excursions. How to identify when exhaustion was approaching meltdown territory. How to distract from disappointment with creative alternatives when plans fell through. He also learned to navigate Nancy's boundaries, which remained firm even as her hostility gradually softened. Do not buy them souvenirs every time we go somewhere, she instructed after their third museum trip, where Richard had attempted to purchase everything in the gift shop. They need to learn that experiences matter more than possessions. I just want them to have things to remember the day by. They will remember it. Trust me, children remember experiences more clearly than objects. You do not need to buy their memories. Richard learned to resist the urge to solve every problem with money. It was harder than he expected. His whole life had been built on the assumption that resources could fix anything. Discovering that some things required patience instead of payment was a humbling adjustment. 3 months into the arrangement, Richard invited them to visit his office. I want them to understand what I do, he explained to Nancy. Not to impress them, but so they know who I am beyond these visits. Nancy considered the request with her characteristic caution. What exactly would this visit involve? A tour of the building, meeting some people I work with, showing them that their father has a real job, not just unlimited money that appears from nowhere. They think you are a wizard. Daniel told me you probably have a magic vault where gold multiplies by itself. Richard laughed. Definitely not a wizard, though I understand why they might think that. Money is confusing when you have not learned where it comes from. The office visit happened on a Saturday afternoon, fitting into their regular schedule. The twins were initially overwhelmed by Blackwell Tower, its soaring lobby and busy employees and general atmosphere of important things happening. This is where you work? Michael asked, craning his neck to see the top of the atrium. This is where I work, Richard confirmed. Would you like to see my office? The elevator ride to the executive floor produced the same wonder it had at the hotel. Daniel pressed his face against the glass while Michael calculated how tall the building must be based on the number of floors. Richard's office, when they reached it, was large and expensively furnished but somehow sterile. The twins looked around with polite interest that suggested they had expected something more impressive. Where are your toys? Daniel asked. I do not have toys here. This is a workspace. Everyone should have some toys. Workspaces are boring without them. Richard looked around his office with new eyes. Daniel was right. There was nothing personal here. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that suggested a human being occupied this space rather than a very efficient robot. Maybe you can help me fix that, he offered. We could find some things to make it more interesting. The afternoon transformed into a decorating mission. The twins selected items from around the building, things that would make Richard's office feel more alive. A plant from the lobby, a piece of colorful art from a storage closet, a jar they decided should be filled with candy for visitors. By the time they finished, the sterile executive office had acquired personality. It looked like a place where a father might work, not just a billionaire. Now it is better, Daniel declared with satisfaction. Now when you work late, you will have nice things to look at. I will think of you two every time I see them. The comment was sincere, and both twins seemed to recognize it. That afternoon marked a shift in the dynamic. Richard was no longer just a visitor in their lives. They had left their mark on his world, and that mark would remain visible every day. Nancy noticed the change when Richard showed her pictures of the redecorated office. They really did all that? They had very strong opinions about what was missing. Apparently, my office was depressing. It was depressing. I saw photos in a magazine article once. It looked like a mausoleum. A mausoleum with excellent views. Still a mausoleum. Richard laughed, and something flickered in Nancy's expression that might have been warmth before she redirected the conversation to logistics. 4 months into the arrangement, Richard received a call from the private investigator he had hired to look into the missing letter. Mr. Blackwell, I have found something you need to see. The investigator's voice was serious in a way that promised significant information. What did you find? Evidence that your letter was deliberately intercepted and destroyed, and evidence about who was responsible. Richard's grip on the phone tightened. Tell me everything. The meeting happened the next day at Richard's office. The investigator, a former FBI agent named Patterson, laid out documents on the conference table with methodical precision. The doorman who worked your building 7 years ago was named Harold Monroe. He was terminated 6 months after you returned from London, officially for time card fraud, unofficially because he had been accepting payments from a third party, payments for to report on your visitors and, when instructed, to intercept correspondence. Monroe kept records because he was paranoid about being set up. When he died last year, his widow found his journals. She was willing to sell them to the right buyer. Patterson slid a photocopied page across the table. This entry is dated 2 days after you left for London. It describes a young woman, dark hair, clearly upset, leaving an envelope with instructions to give it to you upon your return. Monroe was contacted that same day by his regular payer and told to destroy the envelope without reading it. Richard stared at the handwriting, the casual description of an act that had destroyed multiple lives. Who was paying him? Patterson slid another document across. The payments were routed through a shell company, but I traced them back to their source. The money came from an account controlled by the Ashford family, specifically Rebecca Ashford. Rebecca. The name landed like a blow. The woman who had kissed him without permission, whose calculated timing had been witnessed by Nancy. She had not stopped at the kiss. She had made certain the letter never reached him. There is more. Patterson continued. Rebecca Ashford is not the only family member with connections to you. Her cousin Victoria Ashford currently works at your company. She has been here for 3 years. Richard felt cold. Victoria Ashford, my VP of development. Yes, sir. And based on communication records I was able to access, Victoria has been in regular contact with Rebecca throughout her employment. They appear to be coordinating something, though the specific objective is unclear. The implications spun through Richard's mind. Victoria had risen quickly at Blackwell Industries, always positioned perfectly, always knowing exactly what to say and do. He had attributed it to ambition and competence. Now he wondered how much of it was manipulation. What is their endgame? I am still investigating. But based on pattern analysis, it appears the Ashford family has been positioning itself to benefit from your company's success. Victoria's influence over strategic decisions, Rebecca's earlier attempt to insert herself into your personal life. They seem to be playing a long game. Richard sat in silence for several minutes after Patterson left, absorbing the magnitude of what he had learned. 7 years ago, Rebecca Ashford had deliberately destroyed his relationship with Nancy. She had staged the kiss at exactly the right moment, then ensured the explanatory letter never arrived. The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculation, and now Rebecca's cousin was embedded in his company, still working whatever scheme the family had devised. Richard picked up his phone and called Nancy. I need to see you tonight. Not for the boys. For you. I have information about what happened 7 years ago. What kind of information? The kind that proves I never received your letter, and the kind that shows exactly who made sure I did not. The silence stretched long enough that Richard wondered if the call had dropped. Come after they are asleep, Nancy finally said. We will talk then. The drive to New Jersey felt longer than usual. Richard rehearsed what he would say, how he would present the evidence, how he would help Nancy understand that they had both been victims of deliberate sabotage. She met him at the door with an expression that mixed anticipation with fear. They are asleep? For an hour now. Come in. They sat in the living room, the same space where Richard had watched the twins play so many times, now charged with different energy. He laid out the documents Patterson had provided, the doorman's journal, the payment records, the connection to the Ashford family. Nancy read through everything slowly, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock to something that looked like grief. She paid him to destroy my letter. She said it flatly, like stating a fact rather than processing it. Rebecca Ashford paid someone to make sure you never knew about the pregnancy. Yes. Why? I do not know her reasons. But the investigator found evidence that her cousin has been working inside my company for 3 years. Whatever they want, they are still pursuing it. Nancy was quiet for a long time, staring at the documents spread across the coffee table. I have spent 7 years hating you. She finally said, believing you chose her over me, believing you threw away my letter and decided we were not worth the trouble. I know. I built my entire identity around being abandoned, around being the woman who was too naive to see the betrayal coming. I raised our sons with that story as the foundation of everything. Nancy, let me finish. She held up a hand. I taught them that their father was someone who made promises he did not keep. someone who chose comfort over commitment. I was wrong. I was wrong, and they absorbed that wrongness, and now I have to figure out how to undo 7 years of damage. You did not know. You had no way of knowing. I should have given you the chance to explain. Instead, I saw what I saw, and I ran. I made decisions that affected 4 lives based on 3 seconds of misunderstanding. You were hurt. You were pregnant and scared, and you felt betrayed. Anyone would have reacted the same way. Nancy looked at him with eyes that held more pain than anger. You are being very understanding about this. What good would anger do? It would not give me back the years I missed. It would not heal the damage that was done. And it would not help us move forward, which is the only direction available to us. Forward. Nancy repeated the word like she was tasting it. What does forward look like to you? Richard considered the question carefully. Forward looks like continuing to build what we have been building. The relationship I am developing with the boys. The trust we are slowly reconstructing. Forward looks like taking our time and doing this right, not rushing into anything because we finally understand the past. And what about us? The question was barely above a whisper. Beyond co-parenting, beyond the practical arrangements, what about us? Richard felt his heart accelerate. I think that is something we figure out together. When you are ready. If you ever are. There is no pressure, Nancy. I am not going to demand anything from you because I finally proved my innocence. I just wanted you to know the truth. The truth. Nancy laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that we lost 7 years because someone decided to play games with our lives. The truth is that our sons grew up without a father because of calculated cruelty. The truth is that I do not know how to feel right now. You do not have to know how to feel. You can just feel whatever comes. What comes is complicated. I am angry at Rebecca Ashford, whoever she is. I am angry at myself for not asking more questions. I am sad for what we lost. And I am confused about what any of this means for the future. All of that seems reasonable. She looked at him with something that might have been the beginning of trust. You really did not know. All those years you really did not know. I really did not know. If I had, I would have come for you. For them. Nothing could have kept me away. Nancy nodded slowly, absorbing this truth as a replacement for the lie she had believed. What are you going to do about Victoria Ashford? I'm going to find out what she wants, and then I'm going to make sure she never gets it. The next few weeks were complicated on multiple fronts. Richard continued his regular visits with the twins, maintaining the stability they had come to rely on, while simultaneously investigating Victoria's activities at his company. What he found was disturbing. Victoria had been subtly influencing strategic decisions for years, pushing the company toward partnerships and acquisitions that benefited Ashford family interests. She had positioned herself as indispensable, knowing everything, controlling information flow, making sure Richard relied on her perspective for major decisions. The London expansion proposal was the latest example. Victoria had been pushing hard for Richard to personally oversee the project, which would require him to leave the country for 6 months. The timing was suspicious. Right when he was building a relationship with his children, right when Nancy was starting to trust him, Victoria wanted him on another continent. Richard began documenting everything, preparing evidence, building a case that would allow him to remove Victoria cleanly and legally. He also told Nancy everything he was discovering. Their conversations had shifted since the revelation about the letter. The defensive barriers were still there, but they were lower now. Nancy listened to his updates about Victoria with the analytical attention of someone who understood that this threat affected her family too. If she wanted you in London, she wanted you away from us, Nancy said during one of their evening conversations after the twins were asleep. The question is, why? What does she gain from you being absent? Control, probably. If I am not here, she can make decisions in my name, influence the board, push through whatever the Ashford family actually wants from my company. Which is what? I am still figuring that out. But it seems to involve gradually acquiring influence over Blackwell Industries without actually having to buy it. If they cannot own it outright, they want to control it through me, through manipulating you, through manipulating whoever I am close to. 7 years ago, that was you. They broke us apart because I was harder to influence with you in my life. Now they are trying to separate me from the boys for the same reason. Nancy's expression hardened. They are not going to succeed. No, they are not. Now, before we continue with the confrontation that is about to reshape everything, I need to pause and speak directly to you. We have traveled a long way together in this story. We have watched Richard discover sons he never knew existed. We have seen Nancy struggle with revelations that rewrite her entire understanding of the past. We have witnessed two people slowly learning to trust each other again after years of believing lies. If you are still here, still invested in what happens next, then you understand what this story is really about. It is not just about wealth or romance or family drama. It is about the power of truth. It is about what happens when we discover that the stories we have been telling ourselves were wrong. It is about choosing to move forward together instead of staying trapped in bitterness. I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that truth eventually comes out, that second chances are possible, that families can be rebuilt from broken pieces. Subscribe to Mr. Dalton's Storyhouse if you have not already. Turn on notifications because stories like this one, stories that remind us what matters, are what we do here every single day. And drop a comment telling me what you think should happen next. Should Richard confront Victoria directly? Should Nancy forgive completely? Or is more time needed? Your voice matters in this community. Now let us get back to the story, because the confrontation is about to happen, and nothing will be the same afterward. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning, in the executive conference room where Richard had made 1,000 important decisions over the years. Victoria arrived expecting a routine strategy meeting. What she found instead was Richard sitting alone at the head of the table, folders arranged before him with deliberate precision. "Close the door, please." Something in his tone must have warned her, because Victoria's expression flickered briefly before her professional mask reassembled. "Is something wrong?" "Sit down." She sat, maintaining composure that Richard now recognized as performance rather than genuine confidence. "I have been looking into some inconsistencies in our strategic direction," Richard began, keeping his voice neutral. "Decisions that seemed sound at the time, but that in retrospect primarily benefited external parties rather than Blackwell Industries." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The Morrison acquisition 3 years ago, the partnership with Stellar Technologies, the proposed London expansion. All of them share a common thread, which is, they all benefit companies controlled by or connected to the Ashford family." Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, fear flashing across her features before disappearing. "That is a coincidence. The Ashford family has diverse interests. Some overlap with ours is inevitable. I might have believed that once, but then I discovered some other interesting connections." Richard slid the first folder across the table. "Your cousin Rebecca Ashford, who, 7 years ago, paid my doorman to intercept and destroy personal correspondence. Correspondence that would have informed me that I was going to be a father." Victoria went pale. "I do not know what you are talking about." "I think you do. I think you have known about this from the beginning. I think your entire career here has been part of a long-term strategy to influence my company for your family's benefit. That is absurd, is it?" Richard opened another folder. "Communication records between you and Rebecca, dating back to before you were hired, discussing strategy, discussing me, discussing the need to maintain control over someone who is, and I am quoting here, too unpredictable when he has personal attachments." Victoria stared at the documents, her composure crumbling. "You do not understand." She finally said, "This is bigger than you know. Then help me understand. The Ashford family has been positioning itself for a merger with Blackwell Industries for over a decade. Your company represents everything we want to become. We could not buy it outright, so we found other ways. By manipulating me, by managing you." Victoria's voice took on a defensive edge. "You were easier to predict when you were alone. When Nancy left, you became focused entirely on work. That focus made you valuable to us. So, Rebecca broke up my relationship deliberately. She saw an opportunity and took it. Nancy was making you soft, distracted. Rebecca was supposed to replace her, become the kind of partner who would support our goals. But you rejected her, so we adapted. You adapted by inserting yourself into my company. I earned my position here. Yes, I had family backing. Yes, I reported information and influenced decisions. But I am also genuinely good at my job." Richard leaned back, studying the woman he had trusted for 3 years. What was the end game? If everything had gone according to plan? Eventually, a merger. Your company absorbed into ours while you believed it was a strategic partnership. By the time you realized what was happening, it would have been too late. And the London expansion? A way to get you out of the country while we accelerated the timeline. Your attention has been scattered lately. New priorities. We needed to act before you became completely unavailable. Because of my children. Victoria's expression hardened. Children you should never have known about. Rebecca handled that situation 7 years ago. Someone must have gotten careless. The casualness of it, the complete lack of remorse, sparked something in Richard that he rarely allowed himself to feel. Genuine anger. You are talking about my sons, about a woman who spent years believing I abandoned her, about lives that were damaged by your family's games. We are talking about business. Personal feelings are complications that efficient people learn to manage. Richard stood slowly, his decision crystallizing. You are fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Your access to all company systems has been revoked as of this meeting. Any attempt to share proprietary information will result in legal action. Victoria's composure finally shattered. You cannot do this. I have contracts. I have protections. Your contracts contain clauses about conflicts of interest and corporate espionage. Your protections disappeared when you admitted to participating in a conspiracy against this company. Leave now or leave in handcuffs. Your choice. Victoria stood, her face contorted with fury. This is not over. My family will not accept this. Your family can do whatever it wants. I am done being managed. She left with security, and Richard sat alone in the conference room, absorbing the magnitude of what he had just done. 14 years of manipulation, exposed and ended in a single conversation. The people responsible for his separation from Nancy, identified and neutralized. The threat to his company, eliminated. But he did not feel victorious. He felt exhausted and strangely sad. So much damage had been done. So many years had been lost. Knowing the truth did not undo any of it. Richard picked up his phone and called Nancy. It is done. Victoria is gone. I have evidence against the entire family if they try anything else. Nancy was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? Empty. Relieved. Angry. All of it at once. That sounds about right. I keep thinking about what could have been. If Rebecca had not interfered. If I had received your letter. If we had raised the boys together from the beginning. We cannot change what was. Nancy's voice was gentle in a way it had not been before. We can only choose what comes next. What do you want to come next? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. I want to stop being afraid, Nancy said finally. I have been afraid for so long. Afraid of trusting. Afraid of hoping. Afraid of letting anyone close enough to hurt me again. I am tired of being afraid. What would not being afraid look like? I do not know yet, but I think I would like to find out. With you. If you are willing to be patient while I figure it out. Richard felt something crack open in his chest. Hope, fragile and tentative, but real. I've been patient for 7 years without knowing I was waiting. I can be patient a little longer now that I know what I am waiting for. Nancy laughed softly, and the sound was like water in a desert. Come to dinner tomorrow. Not for visitation, just for dinner. Like a normal family having a normal meal. I would like that very much. The dinner happened the next evening. Richard arrived with groceries and a determination not to burn anything. The twins were excited to see him on a non-scheduled day. The disruption of routine seemed to signal something important, and they responded with increased energy and attention. Why are you here on Wednesday? Michael asked with his characteristic directness. Wednesdays are not your days. Your mother invited me for dinner. Is that okay? Michael considered the question. Yes, I think that is good. Daniel says you are our dad now for real, not just visiting dad. What do you think? I think you have been showing up. Mama says showing up is the most important thing. So I think maybe Daniel is right. The casual acceptance, so different from Michael's earlier wariness, struck Richard as the greatest victory of all. Greater than defeating Victoria. Greater than uncovering the truth. His son was beginning to trust him. Dinner was chaotic in the best possible way. The twins helped with cooking, which made everything take twice as long and created twice the mess. Nancy supervised with the patient exhaustion of someone who had done this alone for years and was still adjusting to having help. They ate together at the kitchen table, 4 people sharing food and conversation like families do. Daniel talked about a dinosaur documentary he wanted to watch. Michael described a robotics competition he hoped to enter. Nancy discussed the medical school applications she was finally, tentatively considering submitting. Richard listened and participated, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for 7 years. This was what he had been missing. Not just love, but belonging. The sense of being part of something larger than himself. After dinner, after homework and bath time, and the elaborate bedtime rituals that Richard was learning to participate in, the adults sat in the living room with coffee that had become their nightly ritual. "I submitted an application today." Nancy said it quietly, like confessing a secret. "To Columbia Medical School." "Nancy, that is wonderful. It is probably too late. I've been out of school for 7 years. My pre-med credits are ancient. They will probably reject me immediately. But you applied. That is the important part. I applied." She looked at him with an expression that mixed fear and hope. "I told myself I would never want anything again. It hurt too much when things did not work out. But watching you with the boys, watching you become someone who shows up consistently, it made me think that maybe wanting things is not always foolish. It is not foolish. Wanting things is how we build lives worth living." "What do you want?" Nancy asked. "Beyond the boys, beyond redemption for the past." "What do you actually want?" Richard thought about the question seriously. "I want this. What we had tonight. Dinner together, homework together, ordinary moments that add up to an extraordinary life. I want to watch them grow up and be part of the process. I want to support you while you become the doctor you always should have been. And yes, eventually, I want us. Whatever that means, whatever form it takes. That is a lot of wanting. I have 7 years to make up for." Nancy was quiet for a long moment, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Contemplative rather than defensive. "I am not ready for everything," she finally said, "but I might be ready for something. If you are willing to figure it out as we go." "I am willing." Then we figure it out. Together, one day at a time. The kiss that followed was gentle and tentative, carrying the weight of history and the promise of possibility. It was not the passionate reunion of romance novels. It was something better. The beginning of something built deliberately, with full awareness of what had been lost and what might still be found. When they separated, Nancy was almost smiling. "I have to go to bed. Early morning with the twins. I should head home. Same time Saturday? Actually," she paused at the doorway. "Come on Friday. The boys want to have a family movie night. Apparently you are part of the family now. I would love that." The months that followed were not perfect. Rebuilding trust after 7 years of believing lies takes time. There were setbacks and misunderstandings and moments when old wounds flared unexpectedly. But there was also progress. Richard's visitation schedule expanded until he was there more often than not. Nancy's medical school application led to an interview, which led to acceptance, which led to a celebration that involved the entire family. The twins adjusted to having a father with the resilience that had carried them through years of instability. Daniel started calling Richard Dad without any prompting. Michael followed eventually, the word emerging one evening during homework when he needed help with a math problem. "Dad, can you explain fractions?" The casual use of the title stopped Richard's heart for a full second before he recovered enough to help with fractions. The Ashford family attempted retaliation, as Richard had expected. Legal threats, media manipulation, attempts to undermine Blackwell Industries through various channels. Richard countered methodically, using the evidence he had gathered to neutralize each attack. Eventually, the Ashfords realized that further aggression would only expose more of their misdeeds. They retreated, their decade-long strategy in ruins. Nancy started medical school in the fall, balancing coursework with motherhood in a way that impressed everyone who watched her do it. Richard adjusted his schedule to help with childcare. They developed systems and routines that allowed both of their careers to coexist with their family responsibilities. 1 year after that rainy night, when Richard found his sons huddled under a bodega awning, he stood in the backyard of their New Jersey home watching Daniel dig for dinosaur bones in a sandbox and Michael construct something elaborate from materials he had gathered around the yard. Nancy appeared beside him, coffee cup in hand, shoulder brushing against his. "You are thinking deeply," she observed. "What about? About how different everything is. A year ago, I had wealth and power and absolutely nothing that mattered. Now I have this." He gestured at the scene before them. The children, the house, the ordinary Saturday morning that represented everything he had never known he wanted. Regrets? None. Every choice I made led me here. Even the painful ones. Even the years I lost. If changing anything in the past meant not ending up exactly here, I would not change it. That is very philosophical for someone who used to measure success in quarterly earnings. I have been learning new metrics. Nancy leaned into him slightly, a casual intimacy that had developed gradually over months of rebuilding. The boys are asking about the future, she said quietly. Whether we are going to get married, whether we are going to be a real family. What did you tell them? I told them that we already are a real family. Marriage is just paperwork. Is that what you believe? I believe that we have built something more meaningful than any ceremony could create. We have built trust from rubble, connection from separation, family from fragments. But I also would not say no. If someone were to ask, Richard turned to look at her fully. Is that a hint? It is a statement of openness. What you do with it is your choice. The proposal happened 3 months later, not with grand gestures or elaborate planning, but quietly, in the kitchen where they had shared so many ordinary meals. The twins were at school. The house was quiet, and Richard asked the question that had been building in him since the moment he recognized her under that rainy awning. Nancy said yes. The wedding was small, just family and close friends, in the backyard of the house that had become their home. Daniel served as ring-bearer and managed not to drop anything. Michael gave a speech that was surprisingly eloquent for an 8-year-old, about how families are not made by biology, but by choice. Richard listened to his son speak and felt tears he did not bother to hide. This was what he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. This was what all the years of emptiness had been leading toward. Not wealth or success or any of the things the world told him to want. Just this. Family. Belonging. Home. The minister pronounced them married, and Richard kissed his wife while their sons cheered, and the sun set over a future that finally felt like it belonged to all of them. That night, after the celebration wound down and the boys were asleep and the house settled into quiet, Richard and Nancy stood by the window of their bedroom, looking out at the yard where they had just promised forever to each other. Thank you, Nancy said softly, for not giving up, for showing up even when I made it difficult, for being patient when I could not trust, for becoming the man I always knew you could be. Thank you for giving me the chance, for letting me know my sons, for allowing me to earn back what was stolen from us, for believing, eventually, that I was worth believing in. They stood together in the darkness, two people who had lost each other and found each other again, who had been broken by lies and healed by truth, who had built a family from fragments and discovered that the rebuilt version was stronger than the original could ever have been. Outside the window, the stars were emerging one by one, points of light against the darkness. Inside the house, two boys slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved by parents who would always show up. And Richard Blackwell, who had once measured his worth in buildings and billions, understood finally that true wealth was this, exactly this. 4 people bound together by choice and love and the stubborn determination to become better than they had been. The storm that brought them together that rainy night had been violent and frightening. But storms pass. What matters is what grows in their wake. And in the wake of their storm, a family had grown. Imperfect and complicated and absolutely real. That was the story of how Richard Blackwell rescued a homeless woman from the rain and discovered his secret sons. But more than that, it was the story of how showing up again and again, even when it was hard, even when the outcome was uncertain, could transform lives. Because in the end, that is what love is. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, just showing up, day after day, until showing up becomes staying, and staying becomes forever. And they lived, not happily ever after in the way of fairy tales, but happily in the way of real life, with challenges and setbacks and ordinary Tuesdays that added up to an extraordinary life, which is the best kind of happiness there is. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that it is never too late to change, to grow, to become who you were meant to be, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that broken does not mean destroyed. Subscribe to Mr. Dalton's Story House and turn on notifications because we have so many more stories to tell. And in the comments, I want to know, do you believe in second chances? Have you ever been given one? Have you given one to someone who earned it? Your stories matter. Your engagement matters. This community we are building together, that matters most of all. I am Mr. Dalton, and I will see you in the next story. Until then, show up for the people you love. They are worth it, always.